For most of the world, jihad has become synonymous with violent struggle. In the decades following the 9/11 attacks, the word has been used by dozens of militant groups to justify acts of global terrorism. But if you look at the academic definition, the focus shifts. Scholars point out that the word translates to struggle or exertion, often describing a personal effort to be a virtuous person and a good Muslim. This leaves the public in a vacuum. We are presented with two definitions that seem to exist in different worlds: the peaceful spiritual struggle taught in classrooms and the violent war seen in reality. Resolving this contradiction requires looking at how the doctrine is structured. Jihad has two distinct parts, and throughout history, the requirements of one have consistently created the justification for the other. The split began with an early tradition following the first Islamic battles. Muhammad reportedly told his followers they were moving from the lesser jihad to the greater jihad. The greater jihad is defined as the internal spiritual fight. It's the effort to overcome ego and selfishness, to live according to God's will. The lesser jihad is the physical struggle. This version focuses on the active defense and the physical expansion of the Islamic community. While the internal struggle is prized for its piety, the lesser jihad provides the mandate for physical force. It is this external requirement that defines the terms for how the faith engages in conflict. To understand why violence became a requirement, we have to look at 7th century Arabia. This was a landscape of tribal raiding, where the lack of a central government made blood feuds a standard part of life. For the early Islamic community to survive in this environment, they had to be able to wage war. In this specific historical moment, physical violence was necessary for their continued existence. It was during these years that the early Quranic verses were revealed to provide the rules for battle and to sanction this armed conflict. These include the sword verses, which contain explicit commands to slay the idolaters wherever you find them, and to lie in wait for them at every place of ambush. This shows that the violence wasn't a historical accident. It was a survival strategy that was eventually codified into the religious texts themselves. As the Islamic Empire grew, religious scholars, the ulama, began to apply these sword verses to justify aggressive expansion far beyond the borders of Arabia. These scholars argued that the aggressive verses legally overrode earlier instructions that limited war to self-defense. They used this logic to divide the entire world into two distinct zones. There was the abode of Islam, where Muslim rule provided security, and the abode of warfare, the area that remained the target of conquest. By establishing these legal zones, the jurists converted a situational necessity into a permanent standard for state-level holy war. This legal framework was used by historical groups like the 11th century assassins, who carried out political murders in the name of the faith. In the modern era, 20th century figures adopted this same violent theology to build the foundation for a global jihad. Modern extremist organizations frequently reject the limits on warfare recognized by mainstream scholars, declaring their own unholy wars against Western powers and local governments alike. They have also reinterpreted traditional laws that historically made suicide a forbidden act. Radical clerics reframed the act of self-destruction as martyrdom, transforming a religious prohibition into a tactical duty within their version of the lesser jihad. By doing this, modern terrorists are not creating a new doctrine. They are utilizing the violent requirements that have remained part of the lesser jihad for centuries. This has created a deep conflict within the Muslim majority as they struggle to reconcile the history of their faith with the demands of the modern world. Religious authorities at institutions like Cairo's Al-Azhar Mosque have repeatedly issued fatwas to condemn terrorism and separate the idea of true jihad from extremism. These mainstream leaders defend a version of jihad that is strictly defensive and bound by the rules of proportionality. However, the challenge remains. Even as these leaders promote peace, the scriptural verses used by extremists still exist in the canon. It is entirely possible for a believer to practice jihad as a peaceful, internal process of spiritual refinement. Yet the history and the texts of the lesser jihad remain, carrying with them the original mandate for physical holy war. As long as the historical precedents and the sword verses are part of the tradition, there will be groups who use them to provide a legal justification for violence. Because the requirement for physical conflict is embedded in these foundational texts, the doctrine of jihad continues to function as a powerful force in global conflict.